There are footsteps outside. We're thinking of going out there and just grabbing people and bringing them in just to make this room look slightly more full. Didn't come in here. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. Oh, lovely. I could just saw Brian coming in there. Hi, Brian.
Morning,
Hello,
Paul.
Heather. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
And Graham. Excellent. Good. So we can... it's 10 o'clock. I'd like to get started, please. We've got a reasonable amount of business on our agenda this morning. Welcome, everybody. Our first, it may be our only ever hybrid meeting. So Luciana and I are lucky enough to be in David Hicks 1 without anybody else, just us. Before we go into the main meeting, Graham asked specifically if he could join and share with us some a statement that he and that the council would like to share with us. Graham, can I very happily pass the floor to you?
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning, everybody. What I'm about to say isn't going to be a surprise to anybody, I think. It's about the Ukrainian crisis, of course. The various ministries have written to the council and have asked us to prepare. And particularly in children's services, we have two key issues to address. One is safeguarding. We don't know how many and what mix of people we're going to get. We've all witnessed on TV mothers taking their children into Poland and then leaving the children there and going back into Ukraine in order to fight. So we don't know whether we're going to get mothers with children. It's unlikely that the men will be coming this far, or whether we're going to get children on their own. The estimation is that we'll have somewhere around 700 Ukrainians coming into Wokingham in about 2 weeks' time. Those numbers, of course, are very uncertain, and we don't know, as I said, what the mix is going to be. So really, this is just to put everyone on notice that things are about to get very busy as we look for accommodation, we look for medical services where they're required, to go through our safeguarding exercises and make our attempts to get these children into education. And things will move very quickly. I'm sure things will get missed in communication. It's not going to run perfectly. We all know that, but we will be in contact with everybody to do as much as we all can. And I'm sure that the sentiment amongst the group is to do exactly that, to do as much as we can. So really, that's all I'm going to say. You're erudite enough to understand what the implications are.
Thank you, Graham. Is there anything specific that you would like us as a group to do now, or other than to listen and to be attentive to whatever comes in the next days?
I think you put it right, Paul. It's to be attentive in the next days. We will share what we can as quickly as we can and as much as we can as we go through this program that we're going to have to execute.
Thank you. Just, is there anybody else that would like to make a comment and in support of Graham's statement? If not, Graham, thank you very much. I think we all bear with the sentiment. Just wish we could perhaps do something about it, more actively do something about it. Thank you. You're going to be with us for the next period of time. Yes, you're.
In fact, I have to go at 11 o'clock because the senior management team and the executive are getting together for a 2.5-hour meeting to discuss the Ukrainian crisis. So I will be leaving just before 11.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. If we can move on to our agenda, please. I'm not quite sure where in the system, but there's a number of items that didn't make it onto the formal agenda. In particular, an update on the Woking Education Partnership, a traded services review of the timeline, and an update on the school admissions task and finish group. So although they're not on the agenda, we will be covering those as we get towards the end of the agenda and before the forward plan. If I could start, please, by asking for apologies, Luciana.
Hello, we have apologies from Helen Watson, Paul Gibson, Emma Clark, and Lynn Samuel.
Thank you. Does anybody bringing apologies from other colleagues?
Chair, I've just received a text from Piers who thought he was attending this meeting, but he hasn't got an invite. Is he required at this meeting?
Piers is always welcome at any of our meetings. He shouldn't take it personally that he didn't get an invite, but I'm not, with all due respect, I don't think
not
there's anything
aware
on
from the agenda.
Indeed, from the agenda, I don't think.
Fine.
My memory is that our forward agenda for July, there is
Okay.
a Piers session.
Okay. I'll let him know. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Okay, if we can move on from apologies, please, to the minutes of the meeting of the 12th of January. Can I first ask if those of you that have been through them have any factual corrections to those minutes? If not, then thank you, Luciana. I will sign these as a true and accurate record of the meeting that took place. One of the few advantages of being in the room. If I can move, please, from the factual corrections or the factual correctness of the minutes of the 12th of January onto matters arising from that meeting. If you turn to page 14 in your pack, you will see a list of the 15 items that came out of our January meeting as matters arising. Where they are subsequently substantive items on our agenda, we will skip over them. Where they're not, I will ask somebody to put their hand up and give me a reply. I have a feeling, Catherine, you may well be the likely recipient of most of those requests. We identified that we would explain the calculation of the new funding formula.
Yeah, I believe that was to do with the Growth Fund and Falling Roles Fund in the consultation. I think I've spoken to Carol, but then I still need to delve into that a bit more. So if we can carry that forward to the next meeting, please.
And do you think it will form part of the falling role approach, presentation, strategy, whatever we like to call it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, it all comes.
Then, Luciana, if we could combine that in with what I think on our July meeting is going to be a fairly, I hope, substantive item around falling roles. Thank you. I believe, Heather, that you've noted that SEN consultation should not be sent to secondary schools immediately or prior to school holidays. Forgive me, I think it was Shirley who might have brought that up as a, and whilst I believe your response to that was there are some legal requirements, you will try and take this request into account as much as you possibly can.
That was the response.
Thank you. Item 3, future reports indicate heading. I noticed on one page there was some additional headings.
I did try to do that, and where the activity data related to any, if there's big increases, I've tried to highlight it, so I think it shows yellow on the appendices. So I did try.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Item 4, though, I think might, and it may be because I appreciate Lynn is not well and may not have been able to contribute as fully as she would have normally, but I noticed there are no highlights on the very detailed data that we've got to. Oh, I couldn't see any. Forgive me. To highlight areas of importance.
I tried to highlight on the activity data because that obviously drives the costs. So
then let's look at that as we get to it. But if you could keep that, please, at the very top of your mind. Otherwise, it is a nightmare going through those sheets trying to find where the movements are. Ascertain MFG for secondary school pupils.
That was a query by Ben at Bow Hunt last time, and I've spoken to him offline since, and he got a bit confused. So he said that, I don't think he's at the meeting now, but he was going to just say that he was incorrect.
Okay, thank you. Well, you mean he was? He has subsequently informed himself in a way that is satisfactory. Fine, thank you. Item 6. I don't think we need to worry about this one. The disapplications, I think everybody is aware, was not approved, and therefore the number of schools that would have been affected is now not a substantive item or a key item. Number 7, costs for traded services to be provided to schools as soon as possible. I think there were a number of colleagues, Carol, I seem to recall, and others, asking for that information ahead of preparing budgets for this coming year. Has that information been provided?
I'm not sure that it has, but I think it's the 2 services that were de-delegated and aren't anymore. So EAL's English as Additional Language funding, and the Foundry, the behaviour funding for primary schools. I think that's still being worked on, as far as I'm aware. And Lynn hasn't been around to check with her because she was leading on that. So I don't think, unless schools can confirm otherwise, I don't think anything's gone out yet.
Anybody online who might be able to confirm whether you have received sufficient information to help prepare your budget? So I can see Brian shaking his head the wrong way.
Only regarding Foundry, because we just had a WPH a meeting, and Nikki said that it was still being discussed and nothing had been finalised on Foundry at this stage.
Are there other figures that should have been provided or could have been provided that haven't been? Or do you believe everything except Foundry has been provided? Shirley.
I think at this stage, everyone's budget is going to be impacted by numbers as well. So I think that information could and should be provided as well now, in addition to the Foundry information to support budget planning.
So Heather, Catherine, can I turn it back to you? What are we doing to support schools and their budget planning? Keep Foundry as one block for the minute and look at all of the other areas. What are we doing and what can we do?
Yes, obviously the de-delegated side is only for maintained schools, so we help them with setting their budgets, and we would say to include in that. I think the best thing to do would be to include in their budgets the costs that they were charged for de-delegation in previous years, just so they've got something in their budgets for next year until we know any different, because we're still working through what the charging strategy would be for Foundry going forward. And EAL, I'm not entirely sure what's happening with that. I need to check with Lynn. But that would be my recommendation for maintained schools, is to put the cost in that they would have had in the previous year.
Carol?
There is something in the traded services documents for EAL, but I don't know if that replaces what we got under the traded services or not. I can't remember if it was in there last year or not. There are some costs for some support.
Okay, and then now let's talk about Foundry. I appreciate we touch on Foundry very lightly in the budget for next year. What advice and guidance to schools, presumably across the borough, for budgeting for activity that may involve Foundry?
I'll have to come back to you on that one. Because obviously schools, on the de-delegation side, it's kind of like an insurance policy, because if you needed it, you had it paid for and you didn't have to pay anything else. Obviously secondary schools have always had to pay for anything that they get from the Foundry, so they would know what their kind of typical usage is, maybe year on year, and include that in their budgets. But yes, I wouldn't like to say yet until we've had like the proper discussions with Foundry and the review going forward.
And how do you think that works for somebody in a school who is responsible preparing a budget for this coming year, particularly for an April to March year?
Yeah, I would look at previous expenditure and mirror that going forward.
Let's hope that your figures, when you finally work them out, are no greater than last year. Otherwise, it's going to be very unfair to hold colleagues accountable when the best information they had was to use last year's figures. If you subsequently then, for want of a better word, charge them more, it feels inequitable then to say that's poor budgeting, because it clearly wasn't.
Yeah, no, yeah, we wouldn't say that. But
Karina.
Thanks, Paul. I would just say, having sat on the review working group with Catherine and Lynn for the delegated item around Foundry, that it did come out that the costings between academies and Maintain was inequitable, and I would therefore imagine that maybe academies may need to budget for a little bit more to allow to fund any support from Foundry. Just as a bit of advice, really, that's all I'm saying. Going forward, I would imagine costings could change in that direction, possibly.
Okay.
I'm not sure of anything, but that was what we came.
Thank you, Karina. Ian?
Good morning. I would just, again, advocate what Karina's just said, is the fact that obviously we haven't got the budget finalised yet, which is why it can't be put out. But we've got to look at everything, trying to make it equitable for all schools, but it wouldn't be able to be done at the same price that it was before. So I would also agree that I expect academies that have been paying a lower rate may have to try and budget a little bit higher for the same service that they were using. But I can't guarantee that. But obviously, we're not looking to try and make any type of profit out of it. But we are trying to make sure that the budget is covered by the service that's provided.
Ginny?
Morning, everyone. I don't quite understand why it would be different for academies to Maintain schools, because actually this is actually the great equaliser, isn't it? Because you're not de-delegating, it would be exactly the same unit cost for every school, regardless of its shape in terms of where it sits as a maintained or an academy. I think Karina's point, if and she put her hand up, so she might put me right here, is going to be that and building it's simply that the softening for Foundry has been lost, and therefore the unit cost is going to go up for all schools regardless. I think that's the point.
Karina? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's sort of what I was saying, Ginny, that when we looked at it, because the academies were paying on, I think, an hourly rate possibly, and the Maintain schools were paying as a bulk load, I think it worked out that if I paid the same hourly rate as academies, I would have been entitled to 232 hours a year of Foundry support. So I was just trying to say that for academies, they might want to consider that when we soften it, yeah, the cost might go up slightly. I don't know, but yeah, I think that's what I was saying.
So can we take Ginny's comment that there is an equitability between whichever school uses, benefits from working with Foundry, and that the cost, however it may be calculated, is going to be equitable, whether it's a maintained or an academy school. The fact that the current mechanism may not make that transparent is the thing that is changing, rather than necessarily the absolute cost. The schools will be treated equally. And do I therefore gather that there is likely to be a perceived increase, or an actual increase, in the cost for academies? And would anybody like, at least for budgeting purposes, to put their finger in the air and go, we think you should allow the following? No. It would seem it's going to be wrong, whatever it is, but otherwise you're going to get a dozen people putting a dozen different numbers in.
I wouldn't like to suggest any value yet.
If it helps at all, I would suggest more around. At the minute, I think it was at £28 an hour for an academy, and it was worked out at £23 per pupil number for the de-delegated funding. And the most basic figures that I've looked at for the same type of thing would be at around £40 per hour. So if at the minute the academies were at 28, I'd be looking more towards 40 for everybody. That's not whether they're local authority or an academy. That would be the basic charge for everybody, would be closer to £40 an hour.
Thank you for the honesty, Ian. Appreciated that. Can I open it up to colleagues if there are any further comments, or for the time being, given that that's helpful guidance rather than a definitive answer, that at least enables colleagues to plan on where they may be going? Ginny?
Perhaps just to build on it, as we know, we're in the early stages of the educational partnership, and actually we suggested as head teacher on the partnership that alternative provision becomes a significant item, and that seems to me like a very good forum to understand what Foundry's offer are and alternatives. Not that I would look to alternatives. It is absolutely right that Foundry is the very centre of alternative provision for all Wokingham schools. Because this is, I think that the regretful point is that we're coming to it rather late for budgeting purposes, and hence the comment at forum being exactly right as it should be. But I think the Education Partnership has the space to really explore that, and I would really welcome the head teacher at Foundry, Ian, really explaining what, not the costs, that's the place of forum, but the provision and what that looks like, and what your capability and the mechanisms for commissioning that as an independent school. Well, not an independent school, you know, a single school. That's totally different. We're not interested in that.
Karina?
Sorry, Paul, I haven't taken my hand down.
Okay, not a problem. Are there? I'm certain we'll be visiting the issue again in a little while, Ian, when we get on to the budget for next year. Are there any other comments that colleagues would like to make at this point relative to this matter arising, i.e. the planning and budgeting potentially for the costs that you may see from Foundry for next year? Dan?
I think it's really important to just highlight the review with Foundry and the work with Ian and the management committee and so on is obviously being done in conjunction with myself and the Innovation and Improvement Programme. Lynn Samuel has continuously said we need this so we can do the schools forum with appropriate budgets. You know, I've continually said we do need to do it correctly for the planning of Foundry in the future. So it is our fault that it's delayed, that you haven't got that basic pricing chart to look at and then budget accordingly to, but that's simply because we haven't had a chance to do the work. So I suppose it's more of an apology on our part for not getting it done in time, but there are mitigating reasons with the work that's going on with the IIP. So I just thought it was best to share that, because it's not really on Catherine or Lynn, and it's certainly not on Ian. It's on the fact that the Innovation and Improvement Programme hasn't finished that work with Foundry in partnership, and we've got lots of ongoing things to do, which actually comes back to Ginny's point of what's the bang for our buck, so to speak, and what does it look like, being really accurate on that, so schools know in partnership with Ian, and then Ian knows what he needs to deliver that, so then we can support that decision. So just wanted to share that, Paul, if that was okay.
Thank you for the mea culpa. That recognised, we are still going to be approving a budget at 11 o'clock this morning for the high needs block, and that will include Foundry. So some assumptions must have been made in that, and it would seem to me not unreasonable, whatever those assumptions were, to have been able to share them such that all of the other schools that are impacted by the decisions that are probably correctly being made about Foundry are able to be reflected in their own planning. So I feel there's a complete inequality here in helping to support something you are requesting, i.e. your budget for next year, which I'm sure we'll discuss at some length, but not being able to share the same information with colleagues to enable them to do exactly their job. And they're in exactly the same timeline with the same priorities and the same approvals necessary from their more senior groups. Karina. No, Karina's hand perhaps.
Yeah, no, sorry, my hand is showing as down, Paul, so sorry about that.
I've got you as yellow on my, forgive me. Okay, so then you'll have to shout if I think you're there and you're not, then you want to say something, please shout.
I'll raise it and put it down again.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments at this point on that issue, can I move on to item 8 on matters arising, which is education welfare. We were, I think, due to have an education welfare agenda item today. For whatever reason, it's not on our agenda. We will therefore definitely have one on our July meeting. Heather, if I can ask you please to corral your teams, whatever that might mean, to prepare a paper for our July meeting, which looks at costs and how you're organising it and what its contribution will be over the coming period.
So it's the finances.
Insofar as the finances are an outcome of, sorry, they're an output rather than an outcome of whatever organisation and whatever services you deliver, ultimately, yes. But fundamentally, it sounds like there's a description that goes around EWS that's needed.
Okay. I wasn't aware of, I think there was some confusion about what exactly you wanted from that agenda item. So if that can be clear, then I'm sure that's fine.
Was my explanation not clear? I'm happy to change it again or ask other colleagues to contribute to the explanation if you felt that wasn't clear.
It doesn't feel terribly clear to me, but it may do to the finance people.
I think we were going to just look at the timeline of the traded services with the restructure of LAP. I think that's what we were going to look at going forward, how traded services were going to change in the future and how we were going to cost those out in the future, what was going to carry on, which one services we're going to carry on with.
That kind of demonstrates the confusion, Catherine, which is you think it's about traded services within the EWS.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe outside of this meeting, we can clarify the purpose of that agenda item and make sure we respond to what you want.
My experience of doing something outside of this meeting is that it tends to get pushed into the long grass. Amanda, you've got a comment.
Yeah, sorry, it was actually me that brought it up in the previous meeting. What we were talking about, weren't we, was talking about the funding for EWS, and I was talking about my experiences with not having a lot of support with EWS, and we wanted to talk about the structure. You know, what is the structure for the team? You know, going forward, what's the plan for that? Because it, you know, we felt that it wasn't meeting need.
Yeah, I think it can. If I remember, Amanda, I think you were raising it in the context of the pressure on the service.
Yes, that's right.
Particularly in COVID context.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So it's capacity and ability to meet need.
Yes, going forward.
Fine. That's really helpful. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you. So agenda item for the July meeting. And Heather, you're comfortable now that you understand what?
Yes, I do. I do.
Item 9 is covered later on in one of the items that I'm adding under AOB. Item 10 is just a comment to include the percentage with the value of this central service block on, presumably it'll be next year's budget presentation. Item 11, I'm guessing, for Catherine, you may be able to help. We were hoping to have some explanatory sessions for funding. My guess is that resource capability, which just hasn't been available to organise those.
No, not yet. Okay. No. July would be a good time to do that, actually.
Item 12, we're back into Foundry College. I would suggest we cover this when we talk about the budget for high needs block a little bit later on. Item 13, Heather, you were going to talk to Luciana about representatives from School Forum at the Wokingham Education Partnership. We've got that as a substantive item. We'll cover that later. Item 14, falling roles. We're covering that at our next meeting as part of a substantive item. And item 15, update on school admissions. Brian, I know it's not on the agenda, but you and I talked about you giving an update on that a little bit later on. Okay. With those matters arising from the minutes, are there any other matters arising that colleagues would like to raise before we move on to the remainder of the agenda? I can't see any hands or any indication. Thank you. If we can move on then, please, to item 29, which is declarations of interest. Can I ask if there are any declarations of interest for those attending the meeting based upon the agenda that we have in front of us that you've not already declared? I see no hands and no comments. Thank you. I shall take that there are no further declarations of interest. Can we move on to item number 30, please, which is the revenue monitoring report. Catherine, I have a feeling we're going to be leaning on you quite heavily today, but so if you can draw breath and a glass of water, if you or a different tipple if you so choose, if you could take us through item 30, please.
Yeah, okay, so revenue monitoring is to note, please. Obviously, it's been a bit of a shock with, I'm not muted, am I? No, sorry, I thought I was on mute then. So we have had a bit of an increase in our forecast of £1 million, which was to do with increase in mainstream, both in and out of borough, special schools out of borough, independent special schools, and education other than at school, which is EOTAS. Obviously, that's a bit of a big swing, and to explain that, the figures that we saw in July, it must seem like there's a big swing that's happened from January to now, but actually the data and the figures that were used in the January report was actually based on November. So it's the movement since November. What we've done since the reports have been published is actually look into each level to see why it's been that much of an impact, and try to look at what was in our control and what was out of our control. That's why we've just suddenly discovered £1 million, it would seem. Out of our control were our movers into the borough. We have children with the HCPs that suddenly move into Wokingham, and we don't know anything about it until ages down the line. So that's some of the movement there. We had included in our forecast pupils that we knew from September needed to be placed and hadn't been. And at the point of forecast, a placement could have been £20,000 or £90,000. We had to sort of pick a middle ground just in our forecast, because it takes so long because we haven't got any provision in the borough, it takes so long to get a place out of borough. And then they tend to be the expensive ones that are the independent and non-maintained special schools. Also, we have an issue with health and trying to get a contribution from them. So a placement could cost 120,000. We ask health for 50%, but if they say no, we still have to place the children in those settings. So it still costs us that amount of money. The things that were in our control, what we actually discovered that the forecast that we brought in November for independent and non-maintained special schools it was based on the current pupils that were in the independent non-maintained special schools. So the cost for the summer term had been omitted from those figures. So that was about half of that was to do with that. So that was our fault. So apologies for that. And we also had prior year invoices that have come in that we didn't accrue for last year. So that's another additional cost that's come in this year. That obviously won't happen again next year. And we have issues with our system. And unfortunately, there's things that have been delayed being put onto our system that we didn't know about, and things that the SEND team hadn't advised us of, unfortunately. So I'm trying to explain why there's such a big swing. So I don't know if anyone's got any comments at all on that, but that's the big swing there.
I'm absolutely flabbergasted. That's the value, effectively the turnover of a primary school in one swing from January to now reporting. And forgive me, but I get the concept that you have to estimate a profile and a cost, and that profile might change based upon the ultimate needs. I get the fact that you have no idea how many people are going to be moving into the borough, that those are way outside of your control. I'm staggered by the belief that when you think that when you ask health for 50% contribution, you are surprised when they say no. I can't believe that you would ever think that they would say yes. Or if you have history that they say yes, then where we're going. Costs for the summer term weren't included.
I know.
And no accruals made. These are fundamental.
We did some, but then it didn't include everybody, unfortunately, because we had historic things that were coming through late. So and then
costs not on the system.
I know, but we're improving it all going forward, working with Dan's team with SEN to make sure that going forward, we've been recording everything. So it's a lot of historic stuff that have happened in previous years that have been agreed by previous SEN managers that are now coming to light now. And I know some schools will know that they've been chasing for top-up costs that have happened in previous financial years that we're still trying to delve into and see what's actually been agreed on that, because it's just not on our system. And we don't know what we don't know, unfortunately. But we're learning from it, that's the good thing.
Other colleagues, any comments or perhaps I'm sorry. Fine, there are no further comments. Kathleen, let's move on, please.
Oh, Ginny's put her hand up, actually.
Sorry, Ginny, thank you. I can't see it on my screen.
I suppose that just the added fear is that possibly, probably, there are still unaccounted for bills with schools from the recent past or further past back that's still to come, that are still not resolved through the conversations, and so my fear is that it might grow, and it is. I reckon I feel for you guys representing this meeting, because it's the sins of the past, isn't it? And so there's no rudeness on that point for people who are working really hard to get it right now, and I can totally see that. But I fear that actually it might actually increase, maybe even a little bit, maybe more substantially, because even as a single institution, I am not satisfied that we have got our numbers right, or our income has been received as it should have been in the past. And we'll continue to pursue that as other head teachers will, quite rightly.
Dan?
There's three key points with regards to the finance from my view, and I know Catherine's done a good job of explaining that through. With regards to not on the system, that is, well, with Health First, Paul, we have 3 placements which we feel they should contribute 117,000 to. So I know that's not a million. They should be contributing to it, and we are taking it higher, because in the past, my feeling is because the authority in terms of SEND hasn't been in a good place, we've kind of let them just, I would say, run roughshod. So although those figures are a surprise, or shouldn't be a surprise that they say no, it doesn't mean that we just take it. So I suppose in terms of that, our work with health is ongoing, which links to a few things. And I with Helen's support, I know, because I spoke to Helen last week, we will be asking for a real clear reason why they shouldn't, because the legalities of it, if it went to tribunal, we think they will be named. So just on the health one, frustrations all round. With the SEND team and the historic issues, and Ginny's just raised it, I am ultimately nervous of what that looks like, but we are looking at probably, we think, 50 or 60 plans, which we are trying to work through, which takes us up to the full 1,500, which we've been doing since April 21. And then we think we will have the figure that we're really comfortable with come July or June, whenever the next meeting is, which is not good. It's where we are. Everyone, yeah, like you said, it's not great. I would also say the audit trail of how decisions were made financially were not there historically. So the reason we probably aren't quite there is because we're refusing to pay some invoices, as Catherine will know, especially with the independent and non-maintained sector, on the grounds that they say this was agreed with X person when there's no audit trail, which does affect what comes through. The last thing, which is really important to share with the group, the issue with at the moment with some of the budgeting is, and I'll give you an example, with Oak Tree, those children that would have gone to the new Oak Tree through the phase transfers would have cost around £446,000 for 25 children. Because of the delay, those children will cost us anything upwards now of 800,000. But because of the difference, as Catherine mentioned, between 20,000 and 90, depending on where we have to place them, Catherine and Lynn have said to me and the team to do some work to give them some idea of what we expect that to be, so that in future, while we're trying to build new provision, we can come up with some sort of adequate budget to bring to Schools Forum. as opposed to using the low end of that. So just to give you a view on that cost basis, just those 4 things, Paul.
Thank you, Dan. Any other comments from colleagues? Can't see any further hands up.
Shall I move on to contingencies?
Yeah, please. I mean, forgive me, I'm going to come back. Surely when you budget, you don't, you take a reasonably pessimistic view of the likely outcome. And it feels to me like a number of these are not likely pessimistic views. And therefore you're almost building in this sort of session at some stage later in the year. And as Ginny said, well, forgive me, Dan, I don't necessarily feel for you, and because you've got accountability and responsibility, but for the Catherines and the Lynns of this world who end up reporting these things, I appreciate it's not very pleasant, but perhaps we should bring the people to this meeting who actually are accountable for these problems, the challenges that we've got. I don't believe it's pleasant for you to sit here and listen to this. I'm far from it. But we seem to keep getting ourselves into places where we're going, damn, should have got that better, shouldn't we? Which is just not helpful. Okay, thank you. If there are no further comments, yes, please, if you can move on, Catherine.
Okay, yeah, so de-delegated contingency, we still have the 55,000 from last year that hasn't been called upon this year, so we'll carry that forward for next year. The early years provider reserve fund, so in 2021 we set aside £206,500. We used 122,500 to fund new settings in 2021. There was 2 new nursery classes in primary schools that were in academy schools that opened. We had childminders that increased from 80 to 120 in that year. I think that was that was a big increase from 80 to 120. We, at the end of the year, we didn't spend 84,000, so we're expecting an underspend, and that was confirmed by the clawback that we got from the DfE in November of 90,000. For this current year, we set a reserve fund of 146,500. We're actually anticipating at the moment, based on the provisional data that we had for January, the headcount data there, that there's going to be around a 300,000 underspend. We're still working through the data, and we literally had the final data confirmed yesterday. So working through that to then pay the settings in the 11th week of term. And we'll know whether there's going to be anything left to distribute out to the settings once we've been advised of any recoupment in July. So the DfE are going to tell us again in July rather than wait until November that they did this year. The growth fund, there hasn't been any classes, so the contingency that we had held in the growth fund for any classes that were going to be opening in this term haven't happened, so we're going to carry that forward into next year. So we've already set aside 1,589,000, 1.5 million from the budget from 22-23, so we'll just carry that forward, the 406,000 on top of that to use for growth for next year.
Okay, so we'll have, effectively, Piers is going to have the best part of 2 million quid in his pot, yes, to allocate for the coming year. And
we'll report in July about how that's likely to look, the profile of that, with input from Piers.
Thank you. The early years provider fund, that 300,000 underspend, that effectively gets ploughed back into the system when you get your figures back in July. So it's not as if it sort of gets lost. It does benefit back into the early years group.
Because how we are funded for early years, we actually only get funded on the hours that we do. So they funded us a provisional amount at the beginning of the year, and if we haven't used all those hours they're expecting us to, that's when they do the clawback. Yes. So yeah, so they'll if we're anticipating 300,000, if they only take 250 off of us, we can give that 50 back out to everybody. That's just an example of numbers, but yeah.
Other comments or questions to Catherine on the contingencies? I can't see any, Catherine, so please, if you could move on to, is there a summary that you want to pull together, or?
No, they're just all the appendices, actually. I was going to just say, you could just see like the increase. I did highlight just on the activity data where the values had increased and the different types of settings, how that's actually related to increase in activity. So the increase in pupils that we found relates to the increased pounds and pence, basically.
You did? Okay, fine. Perhaps you and I can have a chat about how we might highlight things. Are there any further questions for Catherine on the revenue monitoring? I can't see. Ginny, or is that my iPad just not showing you taking your hand down?
My hand's down, Paul.
Thanks. So I think you and Karina are now blazing in yellow on my screen when neither of you want to talk. If I can move on then, please, from item 30 to item 31. And item 31, which is, if for want of a better word, Dan's contextual update for the high needs block, the IIP programme, follows or precedes, I'm presuming, Catherine, you're going to share it with us, effectively the high needs block budget. So if I can ask the two of you between you to sort of run through an update and then go into the budget as items 31 and 32.
No problem. Do you want me to lead off with the growth figures, Catherine, and then you link it on the budget? Would that be best?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just share some of the basics because I know a lot of the people in the room would have seen it and before. Just 1 second, excuse me. What we've included is all of the plans that are affecting our provision. So you can see the growth there in terms of September 21, 1,401, and we've risen to 1,533. 1,488 of those plans are maintained in terms of they cost us. They are within our gift to support. We are well below the national average in terms of overall growth. And that continues the trend from 2019, 2020 and 2021. With regards to Imborough, 904 of our EHCPs are being supported within our local area, and a huge number, which is 517, are out of borough, which is where our costs come, as we know. Our biggest area of primary need, which won't be a surprise to the people in the room, is ASD, closely followed by SEMH. Obviously, that's an overall data, and we've dug deeper into that, but it is a growing need that's coming through the system. And one of the big issues that we're tackling, and will be coming to this group as well as the educational partnership and so on, is the fact that we have a huge rise in under fives, which is nigh impossible to predict and project through, but we're working on those solutions. Again, most of that I imagine will come through as ASD and SEMH, and we're working at what provision we need for that. Obviously a 57% increase in just under fives. We are still within the same growth really as 21 of plans overall. What we're trying to do is project what that will look like in the future with a cost. We've done numerous different options of that with regards to new provision needs, which will hopefully contain or start to negate the cost for us with regards to the high needs block moving forward. And then on the next update is just an overview from data with regards to the SEND headlines. Happy to take any questions on that. But we still have considerable growth. It is focused on ASD and SEMH, and we have over 2/3 of our children being educated outside of the local area because of that, which has a huge effect on our high needs block. It also obviously has a huge effect with regards to transport costs as well. But I'm happy to pick up any questions on that because that's a quick overview before we go into the finance.
Would it be helpful on your chart 1.3, where you show in and out, to identify the costs of all of the ins and all of the out of borough support? So, for example, one might see that the 900 young people cost $1 million, or no, it should be way more than that, 3 million or whatever, whereas the 500 cost 15 million.
Yeah, absolutely. I can put that on, Paul, and send it back out.
I think it would also start, I'm sure colleagues are well aware just how expensive our out of borough provision is, but I think it also might bring into context the averages that you're having to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Questions, colleagues, to Dan before we move into Dan and Catherine's presentation of the budget for the coming year? Okay, I can't see any hands up, so again, back to Dan, Catherine, however you want to take us further onto the next stage.
Okay, yeah. So we know we've got some extra funding in our budget next year for high needs, 2.4 million in there. We've also got the supplementary grant that's come in, about 900,000. So we know we've got the extra money in, but we also know that with the increase in EHCPs coming through, we're still not going to be able to balance our budget next year. So we've got about a 3 million in-year deficit that we're forecasting for next year. That's taken into account everything that we know up to date. So everything that we've just been talking about in the revenue monitoring paper, that's all at the figures that we've got up to date. We've included an inflationary uplift in there, the additional EHCPs that we know that are coming through the system that Dan's just spoken about. So it's obviously very challenging. What we have done, I'm not sharing, am I? Okay, so what we have, the supplementary grant that we're getting in is additional 4% on most of the factors that we're getting in our high needs block income. So we have put that against the mainstream hourly rate. So we've increased that by 4%, and also the resource base unit rates. We've increased that. They increased last year, and we've increased them again by this 4% this year. So that gets passed on to those settings. Let me just go through each individual type of setting. So the mainstream, we said, yeah, we're going to increase that by 4%. So the hourly rate is now 461.24. So, sorry, we've also got the post-16 place funding that we talked about that is on the activity data before. People didn't recognise where those 27 places had come from. So we're going to be looking at that in the coming year so that we can update our place change notification in November. That'll be for next academic year. So we'll have a look at that in the year coming. As I said, the resource base is going to increase by 4%, the rates, and they're the new proposed rates there, which I'm hoping will be welcome news for those with resource bases. Addington, we're keeping their rates bandings as they are, because we know that they've got a carry forward, but we know I know that they're not particularly happy with that, so we'll be looking at that going forward. Once Lynn is back, we'll be having discussions about that. Chiltern Way, they're on an SLA, so they're staying as they are. Independent non-maintained special schools, as we said there, there's about they're 32% of our current budget, and it's likely to keep increasing while we haven't got the provision in borough. And as we said, as Dan mentioned earlier, the Oak Tree special school has been delayed as well, so that's going to have an impact in our budget for next year, because that would have opened in September this year, wasn't it, Dan? Now it's going to be now it's September next year. Post-16, they have been increasing when the regulations changed to go up to 25 years. I think this is like the last year now. We've now got 25-year-olds that are going into college, that are still in college, so that has been growing, but I think that's going to be staying, hopefully forward, going pretty flat going forward, but we'll see. And obviously with Foundry College, we've been doing lots of work. Dan and Lynn with Ian have been doing lots of work on getting the budget set for that. So we think we've set them a good budget that covers their costs, but with also the trying to assume income for the de-delegated amounts. We've assumed the same amount of income that they had for de-delegation, that they will be getting that back through like a traded service with the schools. So that's still going to be continuing this year, as Dan said earlier as well. CIPIT, so Children and Young People Integrated Therapies, their contract is being renewed in September. So we've assumed the same rates going forward, but if anything changes, we'll obviously let the forum know if that changes going forward. And then it's just literally looking at the appendices. If I go down to all the activities based on what we know now plus growth, anticipated growth. So this is probably the best summary to look at, which is splits between the costs that we're expecting in Wokingham and the out of borough. As you can see, they're quite similar. So quite a lot is going out of borough because we haven't got any provision inside borough at the moment. And that's it basically. Oh, sorry. That's just showing the difference between what we'd put in our medium-term financial plan at the end of last year was in that column C compared to what we've actually said now. Any questions? Or Dan, do you want to add anything? Sorry, just wittering on that.
No, that's okay, it's fine. So can I open for questions from colleagues? Sarah?
Yes.
Hi, Sarah.
Hello. Yeah, obviously we were disappointed to be the only school that didn't receive an uplift this year. We have got reserves, but the reason we've got reserves is because we've never been given an uplift any year apart from last year and had 7 years of no uplift. So we're a very, very cautious school because we never know whether we're going to get that additional funding. Just to put some context for Forum to get it minuted, 87% of our budget at Addington is spent on staffing. So if we stand still, our staffing costs obviously rise year on year. Because of no uplift, we will go into in-year deficit next year. And by year 3, if we continue to have no uplift, we will have a deficit, year 4 deficit of 608,000 and year 5 a deficit of 1,675,000. So I just want it minuted that obviously we have got reserves, but it's because we have never had that uplift and we have not spent the money on staffing, which we could. And the other thing is, if we could have the money, we would spend it on therapy provision, and that would stop some of the out of borough placements because we would have a better therapy provision here at Addington. So I just wanted to obviously voice my disappointment. You know, I voiced it by email, and my Chair of Governors has also written to you separately.
Okay, if colleagues would bear, let's if we can just dig a little deeper, Sarah. I think so. The figures that we are presented with in column B of Appendix F, which shows the final budget for 22-23, your experienced understanding of the 2 lines that are called Addington, which add up to 6.7 million and a bit, you know from the get-go that you are likely to be substantially over that just because of the staff you've got, the cost increases you're going to have. That's with no other changes.
We will have an in-year deficit next year, but not a cumulative deficit because of the reserves. The other thing is obviously that's not just our entire budget because we get paid from the other authorities as well. It also means that the other authorities don't have to pay us an uplift because we can't charge differently. So we have got on paper, it looks like a large reserve from the bandings that we've negotiated over the last few years, which have been fantastic, and it has staved off a huge deficit position. So it looks like we've got lots of reserves there, but it's an in-year deficit because of staffing costs, because it's 87% of our budget. So obviously any pension rises, NGC rises, all those sorts of things, just to stand still, yeah, we go into an in-year deficit. But we have enough reserves to stave off the cumulative deficit until year 4. But that means we can't spend any money on staffing and expand our provision.
So, Catherine, are the reserves that Sarah's talking about included in the deficit that we are bringing forward?
No, they're separate. The schools' balances are held separately, and it's a separate reserve. Because schools, they get their budget at the beginning of the year, and then any reserves that they get to keep, and they're against their school cost centre. So that just gets carried forward every year. So that's not in here. We treat that separately. I don't think we've ever reported on school balances before because we only know the maintained ones, but we used to report on all schools balances. So you could see that as a separate amount to the DSG reserve balances.
So, Paul, I do understand that the High Needs block is in severe deficit, and I do understand. I think my one thing in the email, it would have been better for consultation. We just got an email telling us we wouldn't get it. So going forward, I really would like an annual review of Addington finances and a consultation at least with Sendon Finance.
I have immense sympathy and empathy with that view, Sarah. The challenge is that the figures that we're looking at don't clearly represent what's actually going to happen in your unit over the next year, and that therefore isn't really particularly helpful. I can see that there's a sort of a side picture that says, don't worry, use your reserves to pay for any deficit you've got, but then surely the logic would that be use all of your reserves and have in here the net cost. I can't see the advantage of having in here some figure that is neither the total cost or the cost excluding all your reserves. It feels, anyway, we're not going to change it. It just feels that therefore isn't the real cost of providing Addington School in the year of 22-23.
No,
and that would seem to me what we should be presenting, but clearly others think differently. Other questions, please. Thank you, sir. Is there anything that you would like us to do to listen to that?
I just wanted it,
for example.
Yeah, I just wanted it minuted, and obviously I have it already written to finance.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Other colleagues? Okay. Is it only me that had that?
If I may,
Sorry, Jeannie.
I know I'm yellow permanently, apparently, but that's in support of Ukraine, actually, and blue. I would just say I wasn't aware of that until hearing speak now, but it is enormously concerning for, I think, 2 points that sort of have most impact for Addington, but similar impact for all schools. So the first thing would be the worry about the president about not receiving right income from other local authorities for not being able to charge differently seems more than regretful, because that only exacerbates Wokinham's position. I think that although it is, and this is not to rain on Catherine's parade, although it is a very good thing that there's an update of the resource bases, it ain't that much, and quite honestly, it is because there has been no uplift for decades, and so this is a sort of chase on that. My other point being that the cost of SEN at the chalk face for schools is going to increase, in my view. And that is because the cost of living is going to become so desperate for people that where we have in the past been able to rely on people who would be willing to work on low wages for family needs, because the way we work now changes because we can work at home and so on, I don't think schools can rely any longer about the easy recruitment. And my fear is that will inflate the costs of that going forward. Now, that isn't forum, that, that's, I'll let the Prime Minister get on with that if it's not her party. And I do think but I really, is it too late to reconsider this funding arrangement for Addington? Because for other in effect, we're going to be paying as Wokingham other authorities' costs, aren't we? If they're not going to be uplifting, if they're not able to uplift. So this feels, I get why you spend with us, but won't it set a perverse precedent that maintained schools, and this is not academies, will simply spend all of their reserves because they may find themselves too in Addington's position, and that then sets up perverse behaviour from maintained schools, not their behaviour but force because of this circumstance. I'm not sure you can respond to that. I just pointed that out.
So do you mean not being able to charge differently to out of borough pupils? Is that what you mean?
Well, 2 points. One is not being able to charge differently, and therefore that, and then this is the first time the local authority are choosing with a maintained school, it happens to be Addington this time, to enforce its use of reserves for reasons other than the governance had agreed. So therefore, are you not setting up a perverse incentive of maintained schools, because if I were a maintain head now, I tell you what I would do. I'd be saying, I'm sorry, Governor, I really think we should use it, because this time next year, there may be this situation that Addington finds itself in now. I just worry it's not the right decision. It's possibly too late, but I just, for what it's worth.
I mean, we can always change things mid-year, obviously, once we've discussed things through with Addington. But obviously that will change the budget.
Forgive me. Why wouldn't we have allowed, with Sarah's contribution, a budget for this year that represented what she, as the most senior person you're going to be talking to about that school, what she believes is likely to be the cost for running that school? I mean, forgive me, we're making a £3 million loss, you know, and we've just recognised £1 million came in January because we've made mistakes. Oh, sorry, that's I didn't mean mistake. There were things that happened that we weren't as well aware of as we should have been. So why wouldn't we therefore reflect the full cost, the real cost of a school in this figure, and say this is our budget for the year going forward?
I think because it has been, the Harness block is so stretched. And we know
it's so stretched anyway. I mean, we're stretching it another couple of £100,000. With all due respect, is not going to make any difference at all.
No. Well, we've just put in there what we need from this financial year's income to support Addington, and we know about their reserves. If we'd included,
I'm going to ask. If you look at what you've done for Foundry, you've clearly undertaken a root and branch review of Foundry, and the cost of Foundry in the budget for next year has risen by 63%. I'm sure it's entirely appropriate. I'm sure you've put a lot of work into it, and it's probably the right time to recognise that Foundry needs much greater support. But if you can do that for Foundry, why wouldn't you do that for the other single largest resource that we've got, which is Addington?
Yeah, we did that last year, didn't we? We increased their rates last year. They're now up to the 255 places, their maximum places now, because we grew the school over the years. So I think,
but they've got costs that we're not reflecting in our figures. So in year, we are going to find that there are going to be numbers that are not going to be what we've budgeted.
It shouldn't be, because they're full out.
You're going to be discussing with Sarah what the outcomes are during the year. So that says to me things are going to change.
Because we don't have the income on here that we get from other authorities. So Addington have got 40, 50 pupils that are coming from out of borough. That's not shown on here.
Is the Oak Tree delay included in here?
Yes.
Okay. What assumption have you made for your profile of EHCP, where you got it wrong, where you found last year you took too conservative a view? What view have you taken this year? Has it taken that learning into account? Could you tell me where it is, please?
It's mainly in independent non-maintained special schools. Let's see.
But could you give me an example of last year we took an average of X and this year we're taking an average of Y, and that includes inflation and our recognition that we were too conservative in our budgeting?
Yeah, so we had 164 that we're going to start the year on. So this is just an example of independent or maintained special schools, and we're expecting that to go up to 191 come September.
And the average cost of those individuals, because you were suggesting earlier that the £1 million change, a chunk of that was because you estimated too conservatively. What estimate have you taken this year, and is it still conservative?
Well, you can see the increase in this year and last year, what we're going to say next year, sorry, and this current year. So it's gone up by nearly 800,000. I haven't got the average cost. I should probably have done that and included a table to say what how we've done the average cost per each place. But you probably have to delve into doing the numbers a bit to show how I've done the increase there. But we have included it, what we know now, to what we're expecting come September.
If we are learning from the challenges we've had in this year, you listed 4 or 5 learnings, accruals, of which one of them was we got our budgeting wrong last year because we were too conservative on the profile, the average profile we took. forgive me, that would be the number one on my list of things that I would get right for this year. I would ask you please to come back and share with us what assumption relative to last year you've taken. I think that's important.
Yeah, I did work through that with Lynn.
Okay, I'm
got it. Yes.
Hopefully it won't take too much trouble to get to it. What assumption have you taken for out of borough inflation? Ignore the places for the moment, just the inflation on an individual place.
Let me find my, sorry, let me go and open up my workings.
I'm assuming you have, and therefore it would be helpful, please, if you could share that with us. What assumption have you made for the fact that because there has been overall increased funding for the high needs block, our colleagues who are perhaps less concerned about the community of Wokingham might start to increase their prices? And given that we are not in a very strong position, that we might actually find the rates go higher still because they know that there is more money available. How have you taken that into your planning account? What would you do if you were an independent provider of services and you knew that all the local authorities had just been given £2.5 billion more money?
Yeah, we have an uplift process that they have to adhere to, independent non-maintained special schools. They write into our commissioning team and they'll say we want to put a certain uplift of this percentage on the next financial year, next academic year, and we actually discuss with them on that. And they'll say they might want a certain percentage, and we'll say okay, but you can only have this certain percentage. It's like it's a whole process that the commissioning team do, so we ensure that they don't just give us any old price and charge us through the roof. So we do look at that to make sure that they don't increase massively.
So I think it would be helpful if you shared with us what assumption you had made, and or get your colleagues in health to do the negotiation, because it sounds like they've got a great negotiating tactic. Just say no. On Foundry, you've clearly assumed a level of income from the effectively the de-delegated, use the same rate of de-delegated. You must have made some assumptions for academy sector. The income that Foundry will receive that comes outside of that.
Yeah, Lynn was dealing with that. Apologies, I don't know the detail.
Shirley, you got a question, I think.
Yeah, I have. Sarah, you may or may not have done this, but in terms of the budgeting that you've referred to, have you incorporated the recent proposals from the DfE on teachers' pay over the next 2 years, which is clearly a substantial increase, where we're saying M1 is 8.9% and then U3 is 3%. Is that included in your budgeting that you're referring to?
I think my business manager's done that. Yes.
Okay, I was just trying to understand the scale of the problem, but I would like to reiterate what Jenny has said as well. It concerns me that the outer borough is going to match what we're offering. I do think it does need to be looked at again.
And just another question for Send. Do you put any contingency planning aside financially for any sort of request for residential placement? We know that in special schools we at least one a year for residential, which can amount to 200,000 per pupil. And I'm just anticipating that because of COVID and everything that's happened, I've got lots more families at breaking point than I would normally have. And I know that it's a massive expenditure. I know that social services are very good actually at putting their part into it, and that health are very bad. But I just wondered if do you have that planning there to look at those residential placements?
With the complex case forum, Sarah, the pressure on health, which is going to be supported by Helen on that as a process of we go through, so that I don't have to be arguing about the 117,000 I mentioned before.
Yeah.
I would say social care have to come quite a way to improve as well, because I expect through the legalities of provision that's provided for education, there are very few cases where Send should be paying for residential placements, but paying for the education provided. Social care and health, on the majority of those cases, should be providing that. So it shouldn't actually be much of a cost to the high needs block. I think at the moment it is, and that is predominantly health. But I do think social care need to come quite a way to support us on that as well. So I take your comments on board that they're quite good. I'd say they're not.
Or they're better than health.
No, so yeah, I agree. Yeah.
And health are terrible, and they're slightly better.
Yeah, so
but it's just a big cost, isn't it? It's a massive cost, and families are sort of waiting. They're in total crisis, and they're just waiting. The places aren't there anyway in the out of borough that we can find, and we know that. And we're holding 2 pupils at the moment that are in total crisis. But it is a huge cost that I think needs to be factored into the budgeting going forward, that you will always have at least 1 residential request placement per year for complex case.
Yeah, we've had so since Complex Case Forum started working with commissioning, contract management and so on, that's been I think we've had 4, and we've got payment for 2 from health. 1 is a tri-split between social care and health after a fight, and 1 we categorically couldn't get over the line. So it has hit the high needs block by, I think, 92,000. So yeah, I agree. Obviously, those are the ones that have come through since we've been doing it. It's the historic ones aren't in there that will come through on annual reviews and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions or comments for Catherine and Dan? Okay. Am I right in believing that you require from us an approval? So an approval of the budget, or do we just note it?
That's a good question.
I have a recollection that from previous years you require an approval, because I have also a recollection that you have to submit something to DfE that notionally has a tick against it that says School Forum has reviewed it.
Yes, you're right. Yeah, that's at the end of April I have to submit that. So I think it is. Did we say that on? I'm just trying to look back at the previous agenda that will say for definite.
I'll let Luciana look. We do think it does require approval. My recollection is also that you are not, I can't believe you used the word allowed, but you are not allowed to submit a deficit budget on the high needs block to DfE, and that you have to therefore balance it out to 0 at some stage.
Yeah, well, we're actually having discussions with them at the minute to say that we do want to set an unbalanced. We want to show the deficit in there, because otherwise it's just ludicrous. So we are going to actually submit it unbalanced, so with the deficit in there, and see what they come back and say, basically. But we're going to so at the end of April, when I submit our Section 251 budget, it's going to be with the deficit in there. We're actually having meetings with the DfE about the safety valve programme as well. That's in September, so we're going to be working with them quite closely with our high needs block budget and trying to sort it out, basically.
Okay. If there are, I'm looking across my screen to try and find if there are no further comments from colleagues. I'm going to suggest, therefore, that we move to a vote as to whether we accept or not this budget for Catherine and the team to submit it to DfE as part of the 22-23 budget submission. I hate doing this, but we're going to go through it, I'm afraid, by name. I will call out. Luciana will make a note of your vote, and we will then ensure that that's captured and recorded in the minutes. Before I go to the vote, are there any further comments or questions? If not, then I'm reading down now the membership list of School Forum and asking for votes based upon that particular membership list. Carol, your name's at the top. I'm asking you if you are supportive or not of the high needs block budget as presented.
I had just raised my hand as well, but it doesn't seem to be working.
Oh, okay. No, yeah, got you. Sorry. Okay.
Catherine and Dan, are we confident in this budget, given what we've heard in the earlier parts of the meeting?
Yes. Well, that doesn't sound very confident, does it? No, it's
no.
We've put in everything that we know about now to date, and any growth that we're anticipating. So it's the best we have with the knowledge we have at the time now.
I think the nervousness, Carol, the massive nervousness on the SEND part linked with finance and all our colleagues is that Wokingham as a local area has got to a point where it is bulging. You know, Sarah has probably 74 children on a waiting list with no spaces. Chiltern Way, the same. We don't have that provision. So the budget set with the information we have is as accurate as it can be, but we don't know what the pressures are coming through, if that makes sense. We've got an idea, but we don't know. And as highlighted before, the swing between our independent and non-maintained is in effect 70 grand per unit, per child. So if you went on per units, it's just, that's where we are. The only way to start to control that and have a really strong eye on the budget is to manage our own. So build our provision, then we can get a grip on it, really, because then you can really hold that down. And I think also Ginny's absolutely right with regards to resource-based send units and provision, and we are looking at what that actually costs, because we want local provision to do more. So we need to look at that to make it equitable and fundable, in consideration of the fact that if we go out of borough, it could cost us 90 grand anyway, if that makes sense. So as confident as we are with what we've got from send to finance and the budgeting, but we are hugely nervous because if we get 5 children coming in and cost us 100 grand and we're ordered, it's $500,000 going up. Obviously, that's a very extreme case, but just to answer that question from the send point of view of what we've done so far.
Rebecca, your hand is up. Sorry, I missed that earlier.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say I wasn't sure that I should really take part in this vote. So it's really not something I should be voting.
You are a voting member.
Am I?
Yes. There you go. Okay. Responsibility and authority and accountability. Yes, you are. I'll come back to that second. So if I don't want to reopen the debate, if we are going to go to DFE with a deficit budget, why wouldn't we have taken the more pessimistic view? Why wouldn't we have listened to Sarah and put another 300,000 or 400,000 in the Addington figure because we think it's likely to happen? Why wouldn't we have taken a slightly more pessimistic but yet relatively and come up with a number that we think is potentially achievable? It may still be a very big negative number, but forgive me, I don't know how many years I've sat here and looked at budgets that have come forward for the high needs, but we have never, ever, ever met one. And you're not going to meet this one. But you've not got any wriggle room in here. You've not got any space in here to allow for the not 5 perhaps at 100,000, but the 2 at 100,000 that will come in during the year. It almost like predicts that. I don't quite understand why we wouldn't.
I think it's difficult, Paul, because I've had those conversations with Lynn in terms of projections and cost, and I think that we have to probably, obviously Lynn's not here, we have to sit down again with Helen and with Heather and say this is what we are really looking at, which we've started to do. Well, we've done lots of work on it, but that is a conversation that we've had internally where put it in. This is where we are and this is what we're facing, and the DFE need to know, but you obviously have to be reasonable with that from their point of view. So I've had lots of meetings with the DFE and they want a reasonable, they don't want the worst case scenario, and we're going to start this work with them on this safety valve, whatever that looks like, and that's where that we'll inform them and they'll inform us, so that hopefully we start to get a budget that you look at and go, God, that was where we were, but we need those conversations, and we don't know what the safety valve work will look like at the moment, if that makes sense. But that is it's a valid question we keep asking as well.
I can only assume you enjoy coming to these meetings and having somebody like me sit here and throw questions at you that are difficult to answer, because I'm not suggesting that you take the worst case, because that isn't appropriate. But it does feel that just through this conversation, through reviewing what our budget for this year or our likely outcome for this year, and now listening to some of the points that are raised, particularly the one that Sarah raised, we're going to be short again. And we're going to be short by a not insignificant amount of money again. Anyway, I'm probably colleagues gather I'm too frustrated by it. So please, no more. If there are no further comments, I'll come back again. Carol, I'm going to start with you again.
Sorry, I've got my hand up, Paul.
Oh, forgive me, I can't see that anywhere on my screen. Hi, Ben. Sorry, please.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I really echo the points that are being made, and I think there's so much sense that we put in what we think is realistic. I've been sitting on the SEND panel for the last 2 weeks, seeing how many new EHCs are coming through and seeing the numbers of those. I just wonder, Daniel, how much have we factored in the weekly number of EHCs into the projected higher needs costs coming through, or are we just doing it on the numbers we know as they are now?
No, they're projected off those plans coming through, Ben. So when they come through, we take an average of each month and put those across to Lynn and then have a conversation about what they look like and cost. So it's using that panel in terms of new assessments, changes of type and cost that come through.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Forgive me, I'm trying to look without my glasses at a screen that is 10 meters away and can't see any hands up. My own iPad is not showing over. So please, if you've got anything further to say, can you shout? Because I'm not picking you up on the screen. No hands, nobody shouting. So thank you. I'll now move to vote. Carol, could I have your vote, please, to approve or not approve the high needs block budget as presented?
I have concerns with approving it because I do feel that it's in line with everything that's been said before. So I think I'm going to vote to not approve.
Okay, thank you. Emma? Oh, sorry, I didn't check whether Emma's not on the call, is she? No, Emma's not on the call. Karina?
Hi, Paul. Yeah, I mean, it's really difficult, isn't it? I mean, gosh, Catherine and Dan, you know, it's a really difficult job, and I know you're absolutely doing the best you can. And I did want to say, Carol, that there is an improvement group, part of the improvement board, that are looking at under fives in particular, because we do have a concern about the rising numbers and the identification and then getting them in the right setting before they start mainstream, which we really hope if we can do that will alleviate some of the cost of them then going out of borough. Yeah, well, I will approve, but it's really difficult, isn't it?
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I'm like you. I share so many concerns about this. I don't know if, Daniel, is this really accurate? Because even we talked about, you know, last month was $1 million and we're coming up here saying that it could happen again. So if it's not truly accurate budget, I don't think how we can approve it.
I think that the difficulty is I come at it from a point of what's happening within SEND in terms of the children and the plans and provision. So it's probably a discussion that obviously we would be having with Lynn internally to say, what average have you used, knowing that my average for independent non-maintained would be 60,000. So how is that factored in? I'm wholly no issue with our projections for actual numbers of plans and what's coming through the system. I suppose it's the conversation with how do we break up what each plan could or couldn't cost of how we come to that. But the numbers that are coming through that Lynn's based it on are accurate. I suppose, you know, I haven't looked at what the average costs are that they've been put on, just what we've used before, if that makes sense. All in all, Brian, confident on what's coming through from what Ben just said at panel. So that's very accurate. It's 30 to 35 each month. What they look like and cost is different every month. So like with every LA, setting a budget against the high needs block with that type of increase is very difficult anyway. I think what would be good at July is to show Schools Forum and Paul as the chair a matrix of how we come to that decision that we can start to agree on, knowing how difficult it is. Knowing how difficult that is for finance to do off our data, and agree a matrix of what that decision making looks like to get to that budget from plans. And maybe that would be a good way of going forward if it's been an issue for 3, 4, 5 years in terms of setting that budget. I think that's the best way to go, because then Heads and Paul think, okay, God, this is difficult, but we're all agreed with best case, worst case, middle case scenario and go from there. I can speak to Catherine offline and Lynn about that to put forward.
Thank you, Dan. That may well be something we pick up going forward. I'd like to try and get through the vote.
Sorry.
There's never been any denying that everybody knows you're trying to move us in the right direction. If we answer each question in turn, then we probably need to go back to Carol and Karina and say, well, actually, does that change? So if I can go through a vote, please. Colleagues, make a comment if you would like to, but if I can get the vote done, and perhaps then we look at where the outcome is and the learnings and the things that we can do. So, Brian, can I ask you, please, if you are for or against?
For on what Dan just said.
Thank you. Luke, is Luke on the call? Yes, Luke. Hi, Luke.
Yeah, hi, Paul. Yeah, I share the same concerns as everyone else, but also yes.
Thank you. Liz, I've seen Liz, I think, on the call.
Yeah, approved.
Thank you. Amanda?
I would say not, I'm afraid.
Thank you. It's okay. Ali?
Approved.
Thank you. Julia?
I approve, but I support submitting a deficit budget to the DFE. I think that's really important. Thank you.
Thanks. Ben?
I would say exactly the same. I think we should submit a deficit budget. It's got to be noted. So I support, but I think we should do that.
Thank you. Darren. Oh, that's very, very unusual. Ginny?
I don't approve.
Thank you. I'll cut me at the end. Shirley?
I don't approve. I think if we're going to put in a deficit budget, we should actually make it more deficit, as we've discussed, to support Sarah.
Thank you. Sean? Can I see Sean?
Hi, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I don't feel that I can, because I just don't think there's enough confidence in it. So I'm not saying that ultimately I wouldn't be able to approve it, but I just don't feel from the discussions that there's sufficient confidence in what's there, and therefore it probably needs to be revisited. So I'm sorry, no.
Thank you. Sarah?
No.
Thank you. Ian?
Based on what's been said, no, I'm afraid not.
Thank you. Kerry? Hello, Kerry. I certainly saw Kerry on the list earlier. She was. Come back to... Okay, Kerry may have dropped off. Ian? Ian Morgan, sorry.
I guess approved, but yes, I agree about the deficit budget.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Approve.
Thank you. Heather?
Approve.
And Paul? Paul's not on the call. And I will vote for it. Thank you. I didn't add those up as we were going. Perhaps Luciana can. Okay, so I don't know whether you heard that from Luciana, but there were 9 votes in favour and 7 votes against. Therefore, Catherine, please, whatever the process happens to be, is Kerry come back on at all? She was definitely here a little earlier. Hello, Kerry.
She had a meeting call that she had to pop out to.
Okay, fine. Thanks, Ian. So there were 9 for, 7 against. Catherine, please, will you submit the deficit budget as presented? Heather, Dan, between the two of you, I think we've got to come back to you. That's the first time I think we've held a vote and it has been so clear that there is major concern about what we're putting together. It's not the effort and the energy and the thought that's going into what you're trying to do. It's the fact that we may be looking at numbers that are not reflective of the likely outcome during the year, and that there may be a better way of shaping that. And perhaps we can ask you then, as Dan is saying, whether it's a matrix form of high risk, low risk, or whatever, but some other methodology of trying to capture a better feel for what the costs are going to be in this coming year.
Okay.
Thank you. Can we move on, please, from item 32 to item 33, which is the early years block budget?
Yeah, thank you. So we, for the early years block budget, we received an increase in rates of 21p for 2-year-old funding and 17p for 3- and 4-year-olds. And we have done the numbers and balanced it, and we can actually pass that directly onto all our settings, so they can receive that increase in their hourly rates. and we need the forum today to approve the centrally retained element for 22-23 as well, which we have got in the attachment. Whoa, sorry, I'm not sharing it either, am I?
Not yet.
No, sorry. So we're requesting £549,938 as the centrally retained, and this actually is not directly 5% of our 3 and 4 year old income, but it's actually taking into account what we think the actual numbers will be for this for the coming financial year. So we think we're going to get a lower amount for next financial year, so we've incorporated that. So the 5% top slice is actually a little bit lower than just taking 5% off of the rates from what our income is. We discussed all this in the task and finish group with Kerry and Ian. I don't know, Ian, if you've got anything you want to say. Hi.
Hi. No, I was glad that you took on board some of the things that I said about how just a generic 5% top slice wouldn't seem very transparent and show us value for money. It has been a tough year for providers, so passing on the full amount will be greatly appreciated from the much smaller providers who do struggle. There are risks moving forward. The DfEs and the Treasury's, their 3-year commitment to funding is potentially next year going to have put us maybe into a point where it may decrease because their funding settlement is relative to 21-22 rates, and there is a likelihood that we may actually receive less money next year because it's going to be relative, and this year's funding increase may be wiped out, and yet we will most probably receive larger than average minimum wage increases, which obviously affects a lot of the voluntary sector greatly. So this is appreciated for this year, and I will be very supportive of it.
Thank you, Ian. That's great feedback. Appreciate it very much. Are there any questions from colleagues to Catherine and or to Ian? Hoping that my screen is going to show me if there are. It doesn't look as if there are. Again, are we required to vote on this?
Just the 5%.
Just the 5%. Okay, yes, because indeed the actual rates will vary anyway, and they'll be adjusted as in how you learn new information. And the net always goes out.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, forgive me, I'm going to go through our list, please. So this is a vote on the centrally retained 5%, albeit as adjusted to recognise the real throughput rather than just a 5% top slice off the top, which does in fact result in a slightly smaller than 5% figure. So Carol, could I ask for your vote, please?
Approve.
Thank you. Karina?
Approve.
Thank you. Brian?
Approved.
Thank you. Luke? Okay, Luke may have dropped off. Liz?
Approved.
Thank you. Amanda?
Approve.
Thank you. Ali?
Approved.
Thank you. Julia?
Approved.
Thank you. Ben?
Approve.
Darren, we don't think so on the call. Ginny?
Approve.
Thank you. Shirley?
Approve.
Thank you. Sean?
Approve.
Thank you. Sarah?
Approve.
Ian Thomas?
Approve.
We think Kerry's not on the call. Ian Morgan?
Approved.
Thank you. Rebecca?
Approved.
Thank you. Heather?
Approved.
And Paul's not on the call, and I'm approving as well. Thank you. That is unanimous. Catherine, Ian, thank you very much. We can move on. I have 3 items that I mentioned right at the beginning of the meeting that I'm not quite sure why they didn't get on the agenda. I don't think they would take particularly long looking at the time. Heather, we were going to ask you for a verbal update on the Wokingham Educational Partnership, and in particular the election / appointment of representatives to that group.
Right, so far we have focused on sufficiency issues, school place sufficiency issues, secondary, primary, where our focus moves to alternative provision next meeting, and we've also looked at special. We haven't revisited, we haven't identified any additional membership required, although we are aware that we don't have direct early years representation. So if the Schools Forum was able to identify an early years representative to become a member of the partnership, that would be helpful.
Okay, so you're comfortable for the other wider areas of contribution you have found method or you've worked to get people into the team?
Yeah, it seems to be working so far. I don't know if members of the Borough Partnership who are on this call wish to comment.
We were commenting today, Heather, at WPHA how well it started, and we feel it's been quite a positive move so far. So,
Jenny?
Yeah, absolutely echo Brian's sentiment. I think it is going to be an increasingly mature, healthy, helpful group that would have strong alignment with Forum. I think it's a good point you raise about membership. There are still a couple of things to square off, perhaps, whether I think early years most certainly. We did promise we'd revisit the representation of trusts at some point, and I think given the Education Secretary's announcement on the white paper that all schools must become academies, to make sure there is some formal engagement with CEOs, and I think is absolutely the right place of the Education Partnership. And so I'd welcome some reflection of that on its membership.
Thank you. Ian? I'm hoping you're putting yourself forward.
Well, I was wondering whether Heather wanted me to poll the early years, the PBI sector, and find a representative, and if not, I can always stand in.
Excellent.
I will leave it to you to decide how to.
Okay, but would you like someone specifically from the PBI sector, or someone from the maintained? You know, someone who's got a foundation stage unit.
I don't know. What do you think, Brian?
I think we've got a number of primaries who already got foundation stage, but also nurseries. So I think from the private sector would be worthwhile.
Yeah. Okay, I'll actively poll and see if I can find a willing volunteer, and if not,
you'll be the willing volunteer.
Ian, have you got the terms of reference and what you need to?
You circulated that last time, didn't you?
You should have it, but if you haven't, just let me know and I'll send it to you again.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Thank you, Ian.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Nice one. We had, as one of the items that should be on the agenda, an update on the Traded Services Review timeline. Catherine, does that sit with you, or would it have sat with Lynn? And are you able to give us an update?
I think that was with Lynn, actually, and Heather, was that?
Yeah, I haven't had any specific conversations about it with Lynn. The plan was to run that alongside the restructure of learning achievement and partnerships. The timeline would be, if it is in line with that, would be September, October.
Okay, so I can see that makes sense in terms of the restructure. So you would, where you need it, call upon colleagues in a period either leading up to that or around that. So have something perhaps to share with us at an October meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we could put that in on our forward agenda, please, Luciana. Okay. Are there any questions? Actually, forgive me, I should have asked if there are any questions on the Wokingham Education Partnership, but I have a feeling Brian and Ginny covered that. Any questions on the Traded Services Review timeline? Brian, you and I spoke briefly before the meeting, or a couple of days ago, about the School Admissions Trust and Finish Group update and how that might support a July agenda item for a falling roles line for School Forum.
Yeah. Yeah, so with that, I mean, PS give us as an update as always around the low birth rates, which is a 2% application drop in our area this year, but there is a national drop in birth rates. But then he is looking at, we looked at catchment areas, whether that would make any difference. He is going to give us try and find some data for us around the demographics of the different areas. If that means there is because that could affect some areas like Wokingham Town Centre, who have got an old population with less children. So he is going to give us some more data around that, because I know that's quite a strict criteria on falling roles and what we can actually fund schools on those. But that, because it can't be an Ofsted rating, it can't be other areas. So he's giving us some more data to see if that can actually work towards that falling role agenda. But we haven't got anywhere further. So we've got another meeting coming up in a couple of weeks. So hopefully he'll have some data for us then that we can feed back on. For the rest of the admissions working group, we've got some good news. We've now got the FAP approved. So we've finally got that in place. And we've got 2 primary reps on it too as well. So that will be coming out, which also helps with, we've got some children who are not being placed in schools because we've got the Hong Kong children, the soon we're going to have the Ukrainian children and others. That means through the fact we can actually place these children, because currently they couldn't get placed because schools had waiting lists, but now they can be placed, which is really good news. Because the schools are on waiting lists, the children on waiting lists are already in schools. These children aren't, and it's a real worry that we've got so many children in the area who are not in a school getting any education. So that's a positive. But I'd like to, Melissa and thank you for all the work on the FAP, and also I'd like to thank Ginny and Darren, who actually helped supported me on just getting it through over the line. So it was a big piece of work, but we're really thrilled that actually we've finally got a FAP in place after about 3 years. So that was really good news. And then so that's the main thing, we're looking at catchments, and we got some more clarity around EHCPs and those sorts of things as well. So yeah, it's been quite positive, the last few things that we have been doing.
Thank you. Are there any questions to Brian in his role representing the Admissions Task and Finish Group? Brian, would you, with whatever support you may need from officers and or other colleagues, would you be able to bring something to the July meeting, talking perhaps about an update on where we are with the task with admissions, but also mapping that into what might be an approach to considering falling roles as opposed to growing growth fund?
Yeah, that, and looking at names given to schools earlier regarding an offer day. They're the 2 main things that we're looking at the next meeting. So I think by July we should be able to forward something around falling role.
Thank you. Thank you. So again, I'm looking at my screen. Any further questions for Brian? If not, then before I get to the forward agenda, I'm going to ask if colleagues have any other business that we've not covered. I'll use the membership role, and then there may be a couple of other colleagues. And I noticed Hayley was on the call as well, who may have any. Carol, anything you would like to raise?
No.
Thank you. Karina?
No, thanks, Paul.
Brian?
Yes, sorry. I think this is Emma Clark's final forum meeting, because she is retiring. So we'd just like to thank Emma for all her work that she's done with the School Forum over the years. So, and good luck, Emma, with your retirement, and enjoy.
Thank you. I don't think Emma's on the call, but we should record it. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for remembering. Excellent. Thanks. Luke, any other business from you? No, Luke doesn't seem to be on the call. Liz?
No, thank you.
Amanda?
No, thank you.
Ali?
No, thank you.
Julia?
No, thank you.
Ben?
Nothing from me. Thank you.
Ginny?
No, thank you.
Shirley?
No, thank you.
Sean?
No, thank you. Only to say that actually this will be my last forum meeting because I'm moving on from the Holt. So yeah, thank you very much. And I've very much enjoyed learning about the way it all works here. I'm moving actually into the private sector, into a school in Guildford, which is a lot closer to where I live. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your contribution to the group over the past period. Thank you, Sean. I'm hoping that somebody, I'm sure Luciana can work through it as well, but somebody will represent the school at our next forum meeting in July.
I hope so.
We can ask you to come back.
Well,
Paul, if I may, that action has already been taken, and the business manager will be replaced.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thanks, Jenny. Sarah?
No, thank you.
Ian T?
No, thank you.
Ian Morgan?
No, thank you, Paul.
Rebecca, anything you'd like to raise?
No, thank you.
Heather?
No, thank you.
Luciana, anything that, no? Great. Then quickly stepping onto the forward agenda. Thank you all very much. Forward agenda for July, we've got our regular outturn and revenue monitor. The outturn is from the outcome of what 21-22 will have shown. We have the revenue monitoring 22-23 high needs block update as a regular item. Education welfare services report from Heather based upon the feedback we were discussing earlier on today. A falling roles item, Brian, which I think you're going to lead. Are there any other items that colleagues believe should be on that list for our forward plan for July?
Sorry, Paul, the only other thing I can think of, because we have various like task and finish groups, is that we're sort of make sure that they're in place with members in place for next year, academic year, because some of them do start quite early on.
I like that as a suggestion, Brian. Thank you. So a sort of a check on who's on which task and finish group. Yeah. That we currently, my recollection, we've got one for schools block funding, we've got one for early years, and we've got yours for admissions. I don't think there are any more formal ones. Interesting. We might even talk about having a high needs block task and finish group, because I can see there's a couple. Sarah is definitely on the list for going on that one. So anyway, right. Thank you. Any other issues to put on the forward plan for July, Heather?
Can I just confirm that admissions report will come from Sal, because he'll be back by then?
I'm sure Brian and Sal can work together to bring something to us. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. All right. Good call. If there are no other forward item agendas, items for the forward agenda, in terms of the meeting, whilst Luciana and I very much enjoyed being in here in this very large room using the facility, we have the privilege as school forum of not being required to meet or vote in person. So we can have hybrid meetings and we can vote electronically, as opposed to many of the other organs of the council that can't vote in that way. Clearly, those colleagues that have been on Teams have a slight preference for Teams. Should we move to being a Teams-related meeting? For all of its drawbacks, I feel we've either got to be all Teams or all present. It feels very difficult being part Teams, part present. And I'm not sure what the advantages of a hybrid meeting are if it's just Luciana and I in here. Catherine's just put a thumb up. Amanda?
I just think Teams is just more efficient for people. You don't have to drive and parking, and in times when time is so precious. And if we have the privilege of being able to work this way, I just think it's more efficient. So my preference would be to work this way.
Rebecca?
I think it's pretty self-explanatory how it should move forward. From the fact, unfortunately, you're the only one sat there. I did have the incident that I came in once and with Luciana accidentally thinking it was a genuine meeting. But the fact you've got so many people here from all these different organisations, schools, and you're able to run it this way, I think it means that everybody can be included and fit it into their workday. So for me, it's self-explanatory.
Thank you. I get the feeling that's probably the sentiment for all. Then can I suggest that for the next meeting, we don't have a hybrid meeting, we move to effectively a Teams meeting, and likely consider that as being the format for future school forum meetings, as long as we last, which may not be that long, but we do have to. So may I thank you all very much for attending, and look forward to seeing you all in July. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Luciana got 1 minute.
Yeah.
Yep.
No, sorry, you're on screen. Okay.